everyone, Amy here. Today I'm going to talk about my writing process, which was a request by Taylor Spurtis. She did it on one of my Minute Mondays, and my writing process is really long, and I don't think there was any way I would be able to talk about it in just a minute, so it gets a full dedication video to it. I'm going to take you from start to finish of my complete writing process, so hopefully you enjoy this and kind of get an idea of how I like to write my stories, which involves lots of planning. The first thing I get is the idea, obviously, and usually while I'm writing my previous story, I kind of have an idea that I play around with my head, but I try not to think about it too much or go into too much detail because I fear that it will drive me away from my other story. So, for example, the idea I have right now for my next book is like aliens and fungus. So like an alien fungus plant and this disease where people grow flowers and die. Like they sprout flowers from themselves. It seems really fun, and maybe like a person being able to touch an object and then seeing like the object's history, which I think is fun too. So as you see right now, the ideas are very sketchy, and these are things I get from like books or asking what if, so they come from many different places. Expanding upon this idea, as I'm writing my other book, I try not to think about it because it will tear me away. Once I get the initial idea down, the phase one, which is plotting, which is where I actually journal it out. I don't type anything up yet, so I kind of think of the characters, the setting, and for my story, I usually think of the end emotional feel. Like, what's the end emotion I want my character to feel like? And this is something I don't know with my new story, but my old story, Balance Newsies, I wanted this idea of being in a place you didn't want to be, but you are now stuck there. So you could have went one way, and you chose to do this other way, which wasn't the best way, and you knew it wasn't the best way, but now you're stuck there, and that's what you are, and you've kind of become this monster, and there's no turning back, and there's no option to escape. And that was the end feeling that I wanted my character to feel. And from then, I know that I have to set a path for how to get there. I really like to use the setting as kind of like another character, or I try to at least with some think of the characters. This is where I make the character charts and I do character interviews, and I do this all by handwriting all of this stuff really organically. I think it is good. So yeah, and even then sometimes I might write a scene or two out, and that's okay, totally possible. You can do that, who cares? That's, just a writing process way. My phase two is actually getting the plot worked out, which is where I write my lovely sequels, which I love to death. They might not be your thing, but to me they are like the be-all end-all for making a story flow and connect, and making sure each scene has a goal and a purpose and the characters are motivated. And I consider my sequels a rough draft. I usually can write about 3 good ones, 3 scenes a day, and 4 if I push it. Now, I'm sure you're thinking that's not a lot, but remember, this is my rough draft, so I'm focused a lot on what comes next and what's happening. These are the big plot points. I'm not trying just to write the first thing that comes to my head, because if I write the first thing that comes to my head, it's usually been overdone and overplayed. So try to reach for the second or third thing that pops in your head, because those are usually not quite as done before. And then I also write a quick outline of what's going on. This one's typed, so that way it's a little bit easier to move things around and maneuver them. I use the hooked process with less, which is where there is a minor problem, and that minor problem that you get introduced in the first chapter is kind of what to introduce the characters, and then very quickly it gets onto the major problem. So with Oolong's Newsies, the very minor problem was that he needed to relax because he wasn't able to sleep, so he's taking this walk to do it. And then the major problem, which happens literally in the first 2 pages, is that he finds Sehun in the canal, which leads to coming in contact with the Korean mafia and having to figure out what to do now, since he left that world and now must return. So this takes a long time to do, and it does feel very kind of tense and stressful because you're trying to look for a good one and not, it feels exhausting because you're basically going through the whole story right there. With the season sequels, I'm trying to make them my rough draft. That way I won't have to write as much with it. Then I do my first draft. My first draft, I do believe in writing it very quickly just to get it down on paper. I really like doing it during NaNoWriMo, but you can do it any, month. I usually try to just do it in a month without, hitting the backspace, without trying to worry if it's good or bad. I just get it down on the page because I'm one that likes to edit, and I think editing is the most exciting thing ever because you're going from something that's lame to something that's pretty. And if I spend too much time drafting the whole thing, I used to have this bad habit of writing 4 chapters and then going back and editing them, and then rereading 1 through 4, and then working on like 2 or 3 more, and then going back from the beginning and editing them all. And this way, it makes it so you at least have a story to write. I also like to write, at this point, like a positive review, dealing with the characters and the themes in as much detail as I could possibly get. That way, I know what I'm trying to strive for with my book. Like, if my review talks about how the person felt like they were there in Kyoto, then I know that I really have to focus on making sure that I get the descriptions right and I get the cultural setting correct. The reviews are I'm picking and choosing what things I want to really emphasize in my story. Draft 2 is where I rank the chapters 1 through 5, and then I edit them in order. The lowest ranking chapter first gets kicked out because it's probably horrendously bad and you don't need it. I like to read it once with no marks, and then the second time I mark up the whole chapters. So when I'm ranking the chapters 1 through 5, so every chapter gets a 1 to 5, however scale you want to do it, it's easier to group all the 1s together and then focus writing them in order, and then all the 2s together and focus writing them in order. That way your brain doesn't get so jumbled. I know I messed up with this last draft where I picked, okay, what one's the worst number 2, what one's the least worst number 2, and I wrote them from worst to best order within the categories, and that kind of messed up my head. After each chapter, I do write the mistakes and what needs to be fixed and how to fix it, just to kind of give myself a clear path of attacking the story. Draft 3 is when I edit in order, so from chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to the end. This is when I read it again once without any mistakes, and then I read it again a second time, writing out all the things that need to be fixed. This is also where I'm checking my major characters and my minor characters, and I'm still focused on the characters' emotions and how to fix them. Adding the emotions my character is feeling at the beginning and the emotions my character is feeling at the end, and what they're worried about, is necessary for how to get this kind of together and happy. Draft 4, I like to read all at once, and then when I edit, I read the whole chapter the day that I'm editing. So if I'm editing chapter 20 today, I'm going to read for a second time chapter 20 and then write my marks on it and then go back. Again, I have the character's emotions here and there with the chart on how to fix the character's emotions, and the emotions at the beginning, the emotions at the end, what they're worried about and how and why. This one I'm starting my edits from the middle and then going to the end and then going to the beginning, just because if you always start at the beginning, you will always have a good beginning and you usually have kind of a not so perfect ending. So remember that your beginning and ending should be the chapters that work the best, but you want to get a good solid ranking in every chapter to make every chapter perfect. And if you always start from the same part when you edit, you have a more likely of a chance that you'll get burnt out towards at least 1 point or 2 points, and that will make it more exhausting for you. My 5th draft, which is where I'm starting to come to an end, I'm ranking and editing the chapters in order of ranks, and I'm starting to develop my query letter and my synopsis, and I'm getting beta reader's advice, which is something I'm also doing in draft 4. At any time you can get beta reader's advice, but it's good to do it slightly in the later drafts, unless you have a good one that can read through your messy not writing. At least I do. I feel like my drafts and how I write are kind of like a reverse onion effect. You know, I like to add layers and layers to my story with each edit. That's the way I like to write. I don't like to just sit down and spend an hour on a paragraph when there's a blank page below it. I don't like to spend an hour on a paragraph when there's still a blank page behind it. I don't mind spending an hour on a paragraph if there's some other stuff below it. That's, you know, just my thing. Depending on the story from there, I will either redraft a few more times or I will start to send it out to agents. You know, just a note to make sure that when you're sending your manuscript out to agents that it is copy edited. This is something that you just have to pay someone to copy edit your story. You're not going to catch all your mistakes yourself. No one that doesn't have to do it for a living probably will. So you must go check those out and get them copy edited, because an agent's job is not to edit your story, it's to sell your story and sometimes suggest changes to make it better, but they're not going to sit there and say, hey, you need a comma here. And that's incorrect. You don't put a semicolon, you put a hyphen. They don't want that, and editors also don't want that. So that's something you're just going to have to pay someone to do and just have to set that money aside somehow to get it done. When I query, I like to put a deadline on it, like maybe a year to 6 months. And if you haven't gotten an agent's response back, then you should just self-publish it. It might seem very daunting, or it might seem not what you wanted, but you have to realize what you want this book to be. Do you want the book to be out there in the world? So if that's true, then who cares how it's out there in the world? Like, you might not be able to go to a bookstore and see it there on the shelf, but when was the last time you went to a bookstore and actually bought a book? I feel like I go to bookstores and I look at the books and I don't buy them. I go home and buy them because they're cheaper online, which is horrible, I guess, but I mean, it's true. So there's nothing wrong with self-publishing. I think that's a stigma that is starting to lessen, but maybe people first starting out, it seems like a very big, like, you want to get officially published, but you don't have to. I mean, there are a lot of writers that went from traditional publishing to self-publishing because, you know, there was no need to do all of that. They weren't getting the attention they wanted, they weren't getting the marketing that the big publishing house actually was doing for other books, so they figured, I'll just do this by myself, and they were perfectly capable to make a living just on self-publishing. So keep that in mind. But basically that's my writing process. As you see, it's very long and there's lots of drafts. I enjoy editing like no tomorrow, so I am perfectly happy to spend tons of time editing and not worry so much about my first draft and just try to do it quickly. I do believe that planning is very important, and I always take a long time to plan. I think longer than a lot of other people do, but I think it makes it worth your time. There was one time where I tried to like pants the story, and I think I wasted a lot of time writing scenes that went nowhere, and that was a waste of my time. Like, I felt like it was just silly to write all these other scenes that I ended up throwing out when I could have just, you know, instead of writing, you know, 1,000-page scene and realizing it's going nowhere, I could have just written a scene sequel, which is like less than 100 words, much less, like less than 50 words, and would have seen the same thing in such a shorter amount of time. So that's why I think editing is, you know, planning ahead is good for me, and I assume probably a lot of you, maybe a lot of you, the benefit of planning ahead is just that you realize those mistakes quicker, and you don't have to waste as much time doing other things. So that was my writing process. Oh yes, draft. What is your writing process? Do you have one? If you make a video with your writing process, I would love to see it. So just link it down below and I will enjoy that like no tomorrow. Except for maybe tea. I won't enjoy it more than tea. I'm sorry. That's just not going to happen. You know, I do these videos right before I decide what tea I'm drinking, so maybe that's why I'm kind of a little tea obsessed. I can't think of what tea I want today. Oh, what tea do I want? I feel like a dark tea. Maybe I'll have like Russian Caravan or the Bohea tea. Very important to decide your tea. Anyway, that was it. Well, until next time, have a wonderful time and keep on writing, you people in Camp and Rhino. Bye bye.